Okay, let's go to this. This other thing I'm going to talk about in my locals later, in my locals exclusive stream. So, back about maybe almost a month ago, December 11th, 2021, I tweeted the following. I'm calling it now. On January 6th, the corporate media will hold a full day of mourning as though this is the most tragic event in our country ever. Remember how they were the year after 9/11? It will rival that for sure, if not surpass it. 9/11, of course, merited it. So tweeted that about a month ago. And now what do we see popping up? Nancy Pelosi announces plans to commemorate January 6th anniversary at the U.S. Capitol. Dude, we've got January 6th coming up on Thursday. Is everyone ready for January 6th? I will be sitting in the tattoo chair getting a tattoo on January 6th. So hopefully I'm going to avoid at least the afternoon of it. But, I mean, are you guys ready for the biggest drama that has ever been in there? You know what we should do after I come back from getting tattooed? And I'm going to show you guys a sneak peek. I have the stencil already tattooed on my arm. I'm getting a big ass sun right on my shoulder. And he's going to add more detail to it this time. It's going to be beautiful. But after I get home, here's what we should do. Do you guys want to do it like if I get home in time, do you want to do a Joy Reid reaction stream on January 6th? Wouldn't that be fun? Should we do Joy Reid reaction stream on January 6th? Watch Joy Reid live? Oh my God. That might have to happen. If I don't get it home in time, maybe we'll do Chris Hayes. Maybe we'll just move it a little later. I should be able to get home in time for Joy Reid reaction stream on January 6th, though. That'd be pretty rad. Because I'm not going to be able to do a 5 p.m. stream on January 6th because I'll be getting tattooed, but we can maybe move it a little later. Let's think about that. But let's see what Nancy is planning for January 6th. These events are intended as an observation as an observance of reflection, remembrance, and recommitment in spirit of unity, patriotism, and prayerfulness. Starting at noon on January 6th, there will be a prayer and a moment of silence on the House floor, followed by a historic perspective conversation between historians Doris Kearns Goodwin and John Meacham to establish and preserve the narrative of January 6th. Dude, first of all, John Meacham is like MSNBC's in-house historian. So I'm sure that's not going to be partisan at all. But how great is it and how telling that literally they are saying that the purpose of the Democratic Day of Remembrance of January 6th, the entire purpose of this is to establish and preserve the narrative of January 6th. These people operate with such hubris. With such hubris that they are literally telling you that their entire day of remembrance plans are specifically to preserve the narrative. Just think about that for a second. How ballsy, how in control of every major institution in our society do you have to be to say out loud on CNN that your specific goal is to preserve the narrative? Lawmakers will then share their accounts of the attack in a session presided over by Colorado Democratic Representative Jason Crow, followed by a prayer vigil with members of the House and Senate on the steps of the Capitol. If any Republicans participate in this at all, they should be immediately expelled from the GOP. I'm sorry. If any Republicans participate in this remembrance and effing prayer vigil, they have shown their cards. The insurrection, which began as members of Congress worked to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, commanded the nation's attention as violent scenes of rioters attacking officers and destroying parts of the Capitol were broadcast live across the country. You know, I remember very distinctly when I called my husband while I was at the Capitol on January 6th, standing outside, not in the building, on the lawn. And I said to him, I was like, hey, you're probably seeing some stuff on TV. I just want you to know that I'm fine. And he replied back, he was like, yeah, it kind of looks like they're just walking between the velvet ropes in the Capitol. That was what was airing on TV when my husband was looking at it. Was people going in the Capitol and walking in. It was the most orderly riot in history. They stayed between the velvet ropes inside the Capitol. How Antifa of them. Lawmakers will then share their accounts. Oh, I already read that. Hang on. More than 700 people have been charged. Blah, 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 blah. One of the darkest days. January 6th was one of the darkest days in our democracy, said White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. It was a day when our nation's capital was under attack. And I think there's no question you'll see us commemorate that day. Oh, yeah, honey. They're going to be commemorating it. They are. They are. But you know what? Do they even have to? Because according to the New York Times, every day is January 6th now. This is from the editorial board. The editorial board of the New York Times on January 1st, the first editorial of the year from the paper of record, the Gray Lady. Every day is January 6th now. Let's read. 1 year after the smoke and broken glass, the mock gallows, the very real bloodshed of that awful day. I'm sorry, chat, can you remind me, in speaking in terms of the very real bloodshed of that day, who was the only person killed that day and who killed her? Just go ahead and chat that in. It is tempting to look back and imagine that we can, in fact, simply look back. To imagine that what happened on January 6, 2021, a deadly riot at the seat of American government, incited by a defeated president amid a last-ditch effort to thwart the transfer of power to his successor, was horrifying. But that it is in the past, and that we, as a nation, have moved on. Yep, you guys are, oh, look at that, Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt. Who killed Ashley Babbitt? Member of the Capitol Police. This is an understandable impulse. After 4 years of chaos, cruelty, and incompetence, culminating in a pandemic and the once unthinkable trauma of January 6th, most Americans were desperate for some peace and quiet. So let's talk about that pandemic. Because I heard, you guys remember when Joe Biden was like, I have a plan to end the pandemic during the campaign in 2020? Does everyone remember that? If you elect me, I have a plan. Trump does not have a plan. I have a plan. I heard a rumor that last week there was a single day in which almost 500,000 people were diagnosed with COVID. We are now living in a reality. We're going to talk more about the impact of COVID a little later on in the show. We are now living in a reality where there is a massive mental health crisis. We are living in a reality in which schools are going to shut down again, in which businesses are going virtual again, in which people are mandating vaccines and masks for they're mandating them because the CDC says to mandate them, and that's really all I can say right about that, because the CDC is our God, and they have mandated that masks and vaccine passports and all that stuff reference the CDC for all your vaccine-related questions, because that's what I have to say on YouTube. Brett Wells says they want to keep January 6th alive to hold it against Trump if he runs again. Yeah, that's exactly right. Let's keep going. On the surface, we achieved that. Our political lives seem more or less normal these days as the president pardons turkeys and Congress quarrels over spending bills. But peel back a layer and things are far from normal. January 6th is not in the past. It is every day. It is regular citizens who threaten elected officials and other public servants who ask, when can we use our guns, and who vow to murder politicians who dare to vote their conscience. It is Republican lawmakers scrambling to make it harder for people to vote and easier to subvert their will if they do. It is Donald Trump who continues to stoke the flames of conflict with his rampant lies and limitless resentment, and those whose twisted version of reality still dominates one of the nation's two major political parties. You're right, Brent. They are desperately afraid of Trump. They really are. Let me ask in the chat. Let's do a poll in the chat. Sorry, Odyssey and Rockfin and Facebook. This is just on YouTube. Do you think Donald Trump should run again in 2024? Yes, no. All right. Asking you guys in the chat on YouTube now, do you think Donald Trump should run for president in 2024? Let me know what you think. In short, the Republic faces an existential threat from a movement that is openly contemptuous of democracy and has shown that it is willing to use violence to achieve its end. No self-governing society can survive such threats by denying that it exists. Rather, survival depends on looking back and forward at the same time. Truly grappling with the threat ahead means taking full account of the terror of that day 1 year ago. Thanks largely to the dog work of bipartisan committees in the House of Representatives, this reckoning is underway. Bipartisan committees? Wasn't Liz Cheney kicked out of the GOP in Wyoming? Is Liz Cheney even really technically still allowed to call herself a Republican? Because the Republicans in Wyoming don't really seem to like her all that much. Bipartisan, my God. We know now that the violence and mayhem broadcast live around the world was only the most visible and visceral part of the effort to overturn the election. The effort extended all the way into the Oval Office where Mr. Trump and his allies plotted a constitutional self-coup. We know now that top Republican lawmakers and right-wing media figures privately understood how dangerous the riot was and pleaded with Mr. Trump to call a halt to it, even as they publicly pretended otherwise. We know now that those who may have critical information about the planning and execution of the attack are refusing to cooperate with Congress, even if that means being charged with criminal contempt. Listen, man, I've said this a million times. I was on the Capitol lawn that day. Trump sending a tweet wouldn't have done anything. Why? Because Twitter wasn't effing loading. There was no service. Very few people actually had service at the Capitol that day. So Trump could have sent all the tweets he wanted, weren't going to stop nothing because no one's phone was actually working. The tweets I sent from my phone that resulted in the FBI showing up in my door, the ones that I sent from the Capitol lawn before I even knew what was happening, they were stuck in like Twitter like loading zone for like I don't even know how long. They weren't sending. And then all of a sudden, everything came out at once. I looked at my feed later. I was like, this makes no sense with the time I actually send them. But it's because there was no effing service. So this idea that Trump could have ended everything by sending out a tweet was always stupid at best. For now, the committee's work continues. It has scheduled a series of public hearings in the new year to lay out these and other details, and it plans to release a full report of its findings before the midterm elections, after which, should Republicans regain control of the House as expected, the committee will undoubtedly be dissolved. You know what? I would actually love for the Republicans to reformulate a new committee with people who are actually interested in what the truth is. I would love for the Republicans to do that. The Democrats can whine and cry about it all they want. The Republicans, if they have any balls, will dissolve the current committee and will reconstitute a new committee that's actually interested in finding out what the truth is. This is where looking forward comes in. Over the past year, Republican lawmakers in 41 states have been trying to advance the goals of the January 6th rioters, not by breaking laws, but by making them. Oh no, Republicans are trying to make laws? Oh no, not that, anything but that. Hundreds of bills have been proposed and nearly 3 dozen laws have been passed that empower state legislators to sabotage their own elections and overturn the will of the voters, according to a running tally by a nonpartisan consortium of pro-democracy organizations. Some bills will change the rules to make it easier for lawmakers to reject the votes of their citizens if they don't like the outcomes. Others replace the professional election officials with partisan actors who have a vested interest in seeing their preferred candidate win. Yet more attempt to criminalize human errors by elected officials, in some cases, even threatening prison. Many of these laws are being passed in critical battleground states. Do you know what this op-ed is like? Does everyone remember the Time magazine article? We read the article live on the channel. That article was a confession. That article was one of the most blatant confessions I've ever read in my life. This editorial is so reminiscent of that Time magazine article that basically confessed, like, here are all the ways in which the Democratic Party fortified the election. This op-ed is a reminder of that. It's basically saying, here are all the things we need to do. Look, the Republicans are moving. The Republicans are trying to follow the rules and do things the legal way. We better make sure we're fortifying things on the back end for the 2022 midterms. That's basically what this article is. Many of these laws are being proposed and passed in critical battleground states like Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, the Trump campaign targeted voting results in these states, suing for recounts or trying to intimidate officials into finding missing votes. The effort failed thanks primarily to the professionalism and integrity of election officials. Many of those officials have since been stripped of their power or pushed out of office and replaced by people who openly say the last election was fraudulent. Thus, the Capitol riot continues in state houses across the country in a bloodless, legalized form that no police officer can arrest and no prosecutor can try in court. What did I say? Look at that sentence. Look at that sentence. This New York Times op-ed is calling for a fortification of the election. That's what it is. They're saying, thus the Capitol riot continues in state houses around the country in a bloodless, legalized form. That's what their fortification was in 2020. It wasn't that there was some sort of kraken, which I always said. Their fortification was a bloodless, legalized form. They're telling you what they did because they're trying to say, watch out, the Republicans are trying to stop us from doing it again. The New York Times is telling us exactly what they're going to do. Dragonwater says, can we screen projection? Yes, we can. Yes, we absolutely can. This isn't the first time state legislatures have tried to wrest control of electoral votes from their own people, nor is it the first time that the dangers of such a ploy have been pointed out. In 1891, President Benjamin Harrison warned Congress of the risk that such a trick could determine the outcome of a presidential election. The Constitution guarantees to all Americans a Republican form of government, Harrison said. These essential features of such a government are the right of the people to choose their own officers, blah, 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 blah. A healthy, functioning political party faces its electoral losses by assessing what went wrong and redoubling its efforts to appeal to more voters next time. The Republican Party, like authoritarian movements the world over, has shown itself recently to be incapable of doing this. Party leaders' rhetoric suggests they see it as the only legitimate governing power, and thus portrays anyone else's victory as the result of fraud. Hence the foundational falsehood that spurred the January 6th attack, that Joe Biden didn't win the election. Well, this is a little ironic. A healthy, functioning political party faces its electoral losses by assessing what went wrong and redoubling efforts to appeal to more voters next time. After they lost in Virginia, the Democratic Party announced that they were going to double down on exactly the same tactics they used that lost them in Virginia. So I'm going to go ahead and say, nope, this is projection. It's projection again. That's all this is. The thing that's most concerning, Adam Kinzinger, of course the New York Times quoted Adam Kinzinger, who cried in the January 6th committee hearing. The thing that's most concerning is that it has endured in the face of all evidence, says Representative Adam Kinzinger, one of the vanishingly few Republicans in Congress who remains committed to the empirical reality and representative democracy. And I've gotten to wonder if there is actually any evidence that would ever change certain people's minds. As a reminder, Adam Kinzinger is not going to be coming back to Congress because they redistricted his ass out. So we don't have to deal with him for too very much longer. Just a quick update on the poll, folks. It looks like only about 55% of you think Trump should run again in 2024. I have mixed feelings about it myself. On one hand, I think it would be hilarious. On the other hand, I think DeSantis is probably the better bet. I don't know, man. I feel like I don't really have skin in this game because I'm not going to vote for a Republican either way. But like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the show. Either way, I kind of hope Trump does run just for the pure entertainment value. But I would also understand if people didn't. I understand why people don't think it's a good idea. So I'm 50-50 with the rest of you. The answer for now appears to be no. Polling finds that the overwhelming majority of Republicans believe that President Biden was not legitimately elected, and about 1/3 approve of using violence to achieve political goals. I think that that's probably an exaggeration of whatever that poll says, but okay. Put those two numbers together and you have a recipe for extreme danger. David Skidmore says, like they are not the people who screamed racism and fascism for 4 years, they see themselves as the only legitimate ruling party. That's exactly correct. It's projection. When they say Republicans see themselves as the only legitimate ruling party, it's because they themselves see themselves as the only legitimate ruling party. And then Dragon Waters says, I think the establishment will be ready for Trump this time. He no longer has surprise on his side. I mean, maybe. I certainly think compared to Biden, and we're going to be talking about Biden's great successes in a second here. I certainly think compared to Biden, Trump is the better of the two options. And I think the American people would be more inclined to see that. And I'm going to show you guys some evidence in a little bit that would back that up. Political violence is not an inevitable outcome. Republican leaders could help by being honest with their voters and combating the extremists in their midst. Throughout American history, party leaders from Abraham Lincoln to Margaret Chase Smith to John McCain have stood up for the Union and democracy first, to their everlasting credit. Democrats aren't helpless either. They hold unified power in Washington for the last time in what might be a long time. Yet they have so far failed to confront the urgency of the moment, unwilling or unable to take action to protect elections from subversion and sabotage. Oh, here we go with the Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin blaming. Blame Senator Joe Manchin or Senator Kristen Sinema. But the only thing that matters, in the end, is whether you get it done. For that reason, Mr. Biden and other leading Democrats should make use of what remaining power they have to end the filibuster for voting rights legislation, if nothing else. Dude, the media is desperate for this voting rights legislation. They are desperate. Thank God for Joe Manchin. We should all pray for Joe Manchin's health and his continued presence, because I cannot imagine the amount of pressure that Joe Manchin must be under. Although I will say this, I did hear something. I heard that there were, what was this latest thing that Joe Manchin killed? The Build Back Better thing. I heard that there were multiple Democratic senators that did not like the Build Back Better bill, but they basically used Joe Manchin as their cover because they had to vote for it in order to be able to get reelected. They were like, Joe, you don't need to vote for it. You can block it for all of us. I did definitely hear that. Whatever happens in Washington in the months and years to come, Americans of all stripes who value their self-government must mobilize at every level, not simply once every 4 years, but today and tomorrow and the next day to win elections and help protect the basic functions of democracy. If people who believe in conspiracy theories can win, oh no, so can those who live in a reality-based world. Above all, we should stop underestimating the threat facing the country. Countless times over the past 6 years, up to and including the events of January 6th, Mr. Trump and his allies openly projected their intent to do something outrageous or illegal or destructive. Every time, the common response was that they weren't serious or that they would never succeed. How many times will we have to be proved wrong before we take it seriously? The sooner we do, the sooner we might hope to salvage a democracy that is in great danger. Thank you, New York Times editorial board, for another article that just projects your hubris on the entire situation. So, guys, hunker down. We've got a week of January 6th memorials ahead of us. I'm sure it will be multiple days.